ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Stranded Survivors. My name is Matt. I'm one of your co-hosts, and I am here with a very special guest today, Nate. How you doing?
Hi, I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. Can you do me a favor, introduce yourself, tell the people a little bit about yourself and some of your work and, education, all the great things you've done. Catch everyone up.
Yeah, of course. My name's Nate. I'm a master's student in entomology, currently working in the taxonomy of cockroaches. Um, as a hobby, I'm very into paleontology, although that's not actually my area of study. But I've combined a lot of my interests in prehistoric life with the actual research that I do in living insects and built a pretty decent knowledge of the evolution of arthropods as they exist today.
So, where they are today, is there a lot of crossover? Like, is it obvious to you to look at an insect today and be like, "Oh my goodness, that is very clearly a relative of X, Y, and Z"?
Do you mean between living groups or between living groups and their ancestors?
Living groups and their ancestors. Yeah, like, are you, you're pretty familiar with the evolutionary history of them. So, I mean, like, are you able to look at a cockroach today and then immediately, for conversation, pick out 100 million years ago, it most likely came from this family?
Sure. It's kind of a bit more loose than that. But yeah, I could give you a pretty good rundown of here's what a living group would have looked like, in the Mesozoic and the Paleozoic, going back pretty much to the Cambrian.
And what, just real quick, just for, I guess, for my curiosity more than anything, what on earth was so different that created such a difference in species between the periods? Why were they so diverse from the Cambrian to the Mesozoic to the, Paleolithic, all these things?
Well, to be honest with you, it's just a really long period of time. I mean, if you look at how much like vertebrates diversified from the Cambrian onwards, you're looking at an equal diversity in arthropods, if not much more so. Um, so like, looking at the Cambrian, you've got the earliest, chordates, right? You don't even have, jaws yet, and it doesn't, you know, you don't end up with jawed fishes into the Devonian. So that's a really long time. And arthropods have had all that same amount of time to really like change and diversify and just get very, very strange.
Yeah, very, very strange to say the absolute least. And it's one of nature's mysteries, really. When you look at all the different arthropods going around out there, I feel like they are probably one of the most goofy, in my opinion. Am I wrong there?
No, I think they are absolutely very goofy animals.
Goodness gracious. What drove you what drove you towards that as a field in the first place? Before we get into all the how ways it's related to arc and stuff like that, what drove you to want to study arthropods in the first place?
Well, to be honest, I think like a lot of people that are really into dinosaurs, it was a childhood interest that I never really grew out of. So I was one of those kids who's always out in the yard, like picking up rocks, looking for bugs. Um, and as I got older, I kind of like lost a little bit of interest in it. It was kind of in the back of my mind, but it wasn't really something that I was like super focused on. Um, and then when I was in high school, I started keeping pet cockroaches. They were actually originally food to feed my lizard, but I ended up getting really into them. And from there, it just sort of, took off again. And I got very into keeping insects and then eventually studying them.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So it's been, lifelong passion turned into a future career.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's fantastic, man. That's awesome. See, if you love what you do, you're never going to work a day in your life. So good for you for first off starting that foundation correctly. Um, let's see. We're talking here a little bit ago about how, they started getting weird. Everything, the big milestones there from where you first developed jaws to, all the different milestones that we've gone through in evolutionary history. But how accurate is the portrayal there of arthropods fitting into like the weird life forms? Like why did arthropods diversify in such a different I understand that they're different species, I understand that, but like why were they so different compared to the rest of the world? I feel like, fish and birds and mammals, you can find these crossovers and stuff, but when you look at insects, they're just They're just so different than every other life form, I feel like. Am I wrong there? Am I just not understanding it properly?
I mean, no, you're not wrong. They are weird. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that they split off so long ago from all other living organisms, but then followed an evolutionary path somewhat parallel to vertebrates. So vertebrates, they start in the ocean, they come onto land, they diversify into various different groups terrestrially. You see the exact same thing in arthropods, where they start out as aquatic organisms, they make their way onto land, and then they adapt from that early semi-aquatic form into a really wide variety of terrestrial forms. So like a lot of invertebrates in general are very, very weird. Like mollusks, incredibly strange. Octopi, snails, all of those, very weird. But they aren't really trying to do the same things that vertebrates are, and sort of they sit in sort of a like, you know, corner of our mind. We don't really think about them a whole lot. Arthropods are everywhere, and they're trying to do a lot of the same things that vertebrates are. So just the weirdness that you feel looking at them, it's sort of like an uncanny valley compared to like vertebrates.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't think about looking at it that way, but now that you word it that way, that actually makes a lot of sense. Okay. All right. I like the way you word that. Looking crossover here with arthropods into the world of Ark. You and I were messaging back and forth a little bit, and there's there's just a lot of weird stuff that goes on when people try to put arthropods, insects, and other creatures into video games. And
Mhm.
we talked about, that trope of the giant insects and things going on, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but I would love to pick your brain about the way some of these creatures are portrayed in Ark and then how that may or may not cross over into reality. um,
Sure.
One of those, everybody's favorite or least favorite, the Arthroplura. Can you talk to me about this? Was it truly a 7 foot long armored menace that could spit acid at creatures?
So the size is fairly accurate. It is a very, very large animal. It is the largest terrestrial arthropod ever discovered. And so that much, that's spot on. No, it would not spray venom. And it was also not predatory. So Arthroplura is an early millipede. Living millipedes are primarily detritivores. They're feeding on, sort of rotting plant matter, sometimes some living plant matter. And a few of them will scavenge sometimes, but they're not built to hunt, right? And so Arthroplura, being an early millipede, we weren't 100% sure for a really long time what the diet would have been like because we didn't know whether that diet that modern millipedes had was a more developed feature or was something that was basal to the group. Recently, we discovered the head of Arthroplura because that was missing for a really long time, believe it or not. And
Really?
it pretty much confirmed that it is just a big millipede. It probably was eating plant matter.
Even still, that would be one of the most unsettling things you could possibly see. I would not believe anyone. I mean, I believe you right now, but if I'm face to face with that creature, I'm not taking anyone's word for it that it's not about to eat me.
Yeah. I think if something like that were around today, people would be a lot more used to it than, imagining it in the past.
That's totally fair. I've seen a couple weird videos. I don't know if they're true or not, but there's some weird little critter called like an isopod or something like that. Do you think people would be eating these Arthropluras if they were alive today? Would it be a sustainable food source, do you think? Or do you think
That is an
maybe
interesting question. Um, so I have tried a lot of different insects as food. It's something that I'm interested in as like a scientific pursuit. But
okay.
from everything that I've heard, isopods just taste like rotting leaves and dirt because of what they eat. And I can imagine that Arthroplura probably tastes pretty similar if that was what it was eating back then, right? It probably was not a delicacy.
It's so disturbing to think about. Not pleasant to look at on your plate and then taste like rotting leaves and smells like a rainy day in November.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. Okay, so they got it. They got that one. We'll say, what would you give that? Like a B rating for the size and maybe
Yeah,
a C.
yeah. I mean, it gives the point across of what Arthroplura is. I think the behavior is the more of the stuff that I'm like, well, they could have done better with that. Um, The visual design, I mean, it's very much just Arc. It looks like it's designed for Arc, which, you know, good for it. It fits with the style of the game. Not my personal favorite design choices, but it works for what it is.
Differences in design choices, because you worked pretty. Which mod was it for Minecraft that you did a lot of work on?
Yeah, so I work for the Prehistoric Nature mod, which is a 1.12 mod that adds almost 2,000 different prehistoric animals at this point. And we've done a lot of
Holy
work to
crap.
reconstruct animals accurately. So, yeah.
So, that being said, what design choices would you have changed if, in a perfect world, you had unlimited creative control and the capability to make all of these come true? What would you have done creatively, design-wise, differently?
Um, my preferences, to be honest, are a lot of nitpicks, so don't take them like too to heart. Um, One of the things that gets me about a lot of Arthroplura designs is that millipedes basically have a little head shield above where their head is, and most reconstructions of Arthroplura miss that. Um, Again, we recently found the head. It confirmed that yes, it should have that. Um, the other thing is that the mouth parts in millipedes, they face downward. They're like grazing animals, right? So their mouth is facing towards the ground. They're eating gunk off the ground. The mouth of Arthropleura and Arc is like a centipede, where it's facing forward, which makes sense for a predator, which they've depicted it as, but it's again not a predator in real life. Um, and for sure, the most nitpicky thing is that millipedes actually have two pairs of legs per segment because each of their segments of their body are actually two segments crammed together into one segment called a diplosegment. So if you were to look on the underside of Arthropleura, each segment should have two legs versus the one leg per segment that the one in Arc has.
Oh, okay. So you call that really nitpicky. I actually feel like that's a big one. I feel like that would be equivalent to giving a horse a fifth leg, you know what I mean?
I think the main thing with the Arthropleura design in Arc is that a lot of it's taken from centipedes, which makes sense if you want to make like a big scary monster, right? Because centipedes can be pretty nasty, but
True.
Arthropleura is more of like a gentle giant, the cow of the Carboniferous.
Oh my goodness. Well, now I want to ride one, and that's not something I ever thought I would say. All right, so Arthropluera, not so bad. What about Meganeura? In Ark, they have it as this random scavenger, giant dragonfly, maybe, I don't know, a third the size of a person, maybe a quarter the size of a person, will come in after you kill a dinosaur and let it sit there for a while and will attack you if you get too close to its food source.
Yeah, so looking at the design of Meganura, the basic idea is definitely there, right? Interpreting as basically just a giant dragonfly, that makes sense, right? Um, Ecologically, it probably would have been more of an active predator. I mean, that's what modern day dragonflies are. They're one of the most successful hunters on Earth. Like their hunting attempts have like 90% success rate, and they just pick things out of the air. They're incredibly good at it. So less of a scavenger, more of an active predator. Um, the main issues that I actually have with the Mega Nura design are in the fact that Mega Nura is not actually a dragonfly.
Really?
Yeah. So Meganura is on the evolutionary line that leads to dragonflies and damselflies, but it's basically like saying that, a Cretaceous mammal is like, a primate or something, right? Like there's a huge like gap between them where it's like, there is this evolutionary lineage that connects them to dragonflies, sure, 100%. But because they're not quite dragonflies, there's some real weird anatomical bits that like almost nobody ever reconstructs correctly. Um, the most noticeable one to me personally is that Meganer has really long antennae, like not much shorter than like you'd see in like an average bug today. But modern dragonflies have these super short bristle-like antennae, and that's what they went with in the Meganura design, which again makes sense if you're doing a giant dragonfly, because that's what modern dragonflies have. The other thing is that Meganura has a like proportionally small head compared to modern dragonflies, which make it look kind of funny. Um, and the eyes are a little bit different too. And there's actually a really, really good reconstruction online by a user by the name of Kia Bug Boy. that like points out all these differences between Meganura and modern dragonflies. So if anybody listening, wants to get a sense of what I'm talking about, that's a great place to look.
Oh yeah, everybody go look into that if you want to get a good reference point. That's a good one. Um, this is kind of, I guess, a bit of a surprise because I didn't pitch this one to you earlier, I don't think, but it just randomly popped up in my brain here. What about Rhinignatha? Is that because I mean, a lot of what you described, sort of with what you would expect their predatory behavior to be like, is comparable in art to what they have as the Rhinignatha, which is I don't know, like a giant. I don't know. It looks like a giant mayfly to me. Um, but this one's like
So
larger than a T-Rex.
Rani Ignath is one of the funniest to me because it's one that we looked at reconstructing for our Minecraft mod and ended up saying, no, this is too fragmentary and too small to reconstruct. Rani Ignatha, the name Natha, that means mouth, right? Rhinia
Okay.
means it's from the Rhynie chert, so it's the mouth from the Rhynie chert. What it is a pair of mandibles from a formation that really only preserves microfossils. And so this is a very, very, very tiny animal. Um,
What?
we're not even sure if it's an insect or not. It might be a centipede. The mouth shows some similarities to early centipedes, but again, it's so small and so like indeterminate. We don't really know what it is.
That is so shocking to me. Art got that one so wrong. It's literally like, hang on, I've got one in my inventory. Let me throw it out real quick. It's probably, oh God, it's 30 to 40 feet long, probably, if I had to guess. And it's got like a big ova depositor on the back, like it looks like it's gonna plant an egg inside of you.
Hmm. Yeah, my personal guess is that it is probably a very small centipede, that's most likely what it is. If it's not, then it's a very early wingless insect. This is an animal from the Devonian. This is before insects had even evolved wings.
Oh my goodness, that's truly outrageous. Okay, they got that one really bad then. Wow. Okay. All right, so Ryan Ignatha, not so good. We're gonna give that one a bad grade. That one probably failed.
Yeah, that one's pretty much they had a fun concept in mind and went, oh, what name can we give to it? They made a cool animal, but it's not Rani Ignatha.
I feel like somebody in the brainstorming room Googled prehistoric bugs and then just started spitting names out.
Yeah, I mean, we've spent plenty of time looking up random names and hoping that they're interesting.
You can't go wrong there, right? Yeah. Shine a light in the dark, you'll find one eventually. Um, what about Titanomyrma? I'm probably pronouncing that
Mhm.
one wrong, but in art, it's basically a ginormous ant. You're looking at 3 foot long, maybe 2 foot tall, 3 foot tall, and they're pretty aggressive if you get too close. And they have like this toxic venom that if they bite you, it will paralyze you and knock you unconscious, and then they just basically go to town on you at that point.
Right, right. So Titanomirma is actually quite interesting for a couple of reasons. One of those is that this is not one of the giant carboniferous insects, right? So when people think giant prehistoric insects, they're thinking the Carboniferous. That's when Meganura and Arthroplura are from, right?
Okay.
Titanomyrma is actually much more recent. It's about 50 to 40 million years old. This is during the Eocene. So this is after the dinosaurs have gone extinct, right?
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah. So the scale that we're talking about for this animal is actually very different from what a giant insect was during the Carboniferous. If you had to take a wild guess as to what the biggest specimen of Titanomyrma is, how big do you think it'd be?
All of my knowledge is based on what I've seen in art, so I would assume um I'm gonna go, since it's gonna be extra big, we're going to queen. It's gonna be 4 foot long and uh 2.5 foot at the shoulders. If they have shoulders. I don't know how ants work.
So, so the queen is 7 centimeters.
What?
The male's 3 centimeters.
So that's like reasonable to see today, I feel like.
Yeah. So this is the largest ant ever discovered. and it is quite large for an ant, but it's not a giant animal, you know?
Well, goodness gracious. I get it because a 7 centimeter creature wouldn't make sense in a video game. So I get that, I guess. But that's just
Yeah.
so bizarre to me. You
And
know,
a lot of it's
that,
just, rule of cool, right? Like you want a cool animal in the game. You've got an ant that's called, Titanomyrma. You're gonna make it big. But in real life, it's just, a little bigger than other ants.
that's fair. That's fair. Okay. So another case of Titano getting us and Rhinio making us think of rhinoceros and all these things a little wordplay there. I see what they did.
Yeah, so some other interesting things about Titanomyrma. Venom is not, implausible. There are plenty of ants with venomous bites. Um, I've gotten bit by some pretty nasty ones. I had to deal
Really?
with fire ants this summer.
Ugh,
Those suck.
they
Um,
really
I
do.
got stung by a trapjaw ant in Costa Rica a couple years ago. That was actually not with the jaws though. They have the stinger on the abdomen like other wasps. Um, but yeah, ants have some pretty nasty stings, and there's some that like can really mess you up. So that part's pretty reasonable.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess considering that they scale it with the size, that would make sense that if there was an ant that was multiple foot in size, the venom would probably be pretty lethal, I would assume.
Yeah. The other thing that I saw while I was looking into this, am I correct in stating that there's two types in the game? There's soldiers and drones.
Correct. Yeah, the soldiers are on foot only, and then the drones fly.
Gotcha. Um, so in real life, there kind of are soldier and drone casts for ants. Those names are usually more referred to for like bees or termites. Um,
Okay.
but what's interesting, so the soldiers would be generally in ants called majors. They're the larger of the worker ants. They're wingless ants. And then if there's a soldier class, there's also a minor class, which are smaller workers. So Titanomyrma would probably have a worker class. We don't know if it would have separate major and minor classes, right? So we don't know if it has a soldier. Um, the other class, drones. Drones are males. Typically, we don't call them drones and ants, but you can. It's not incorrect. Um, but drones are winged ants, right? So most ants will not have wings. Workers do not have wings. There's only two kinds of ants that will have wings, those being queens and drones or male ants, right? So ants will have nuptial flights where the future queens and the males will fly out. The queens will then remove their wings, go underground, form a colony. The male ants will just die. So drones, pretty much their whole function in life is just to live for a couple of days outside the hive, mate, and then die. So in real life, you probably wouldn't be interacting with very many winged ants at all because they're only coming out at a very, very specific time to reproduce.
That's fair. Okay. Okay. What's up with carpenter ants in the modern age? Because I feel like this past summer I saw a pretty nice collection of flying ants that I believe I was told were carpenter ants. Was that like a hiving scenario that I walked up on, or
Yeah,
are they different?
so ants have what are called nuptial flights, where all of the sexually mature male ants and the future queens, they all fly out at the same time. They time it together, which increases their
Gotcha.
chance of finding a mate and then starting a new colony. So if you see one winged ant, you usually see a lot of them, but most of the time you will see none.
Very interesting. Okay. Huh. All right. So Titanomerma, they did all right, I'd say. Okay, they got the size wrong, but we'll get into that trope here in a minute. But aside from that, not too bad, right?
I mean, it's a big ant. The design itself is not really that closely based on the actual animal, but you know what they're going for. It's fine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You get the gist of it. I guess think grounded, right? You ever played that game?
No, I never got around to it.
Man, it's basically Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but in like an
Mhm.
RPG survival version.
Hmm.
Uh, let's see. And then the last specific dino that I wanted, or quote unquote dino from Ark that I wanted to talk about. This one caught my attention because you said it was more a broad term than anything, the Eurypterid. This one has seen some evolution in Ark. In the first Ark, Survival Evolved, it was like a 5 to 6 foot long sea scorpion that will knock you underwater and drown you, and it's terrible. They would travel in herds or packs, whatever you want to call it, and if you saw them, you were doomed if you could swim away fast enough. In the new arc, they're like these, actual scorpion-sized creatures that are still in the water, but they're more like, I don't know, um, they're like decorations, I guess, that you can kill
Hmm.
for black pearls, but they don't really do much in the new one. They just sort of swim around.
Interesting. Yeah, I had a look at the one that I think is probably from the first game. And to be honest, the Eurypterid makes me a little bit sad, not because it's a terrible design, but just because like it's such a hugely diverse group of animals that lived for literally hundreds of millions of years, and like knocking them down to like just one kind is a little bit sad. Like the amount of variation that I'm talking about is that like the smallest Eurypterid is like 2 centimeters, and they got up to like 3 meters. There's some that are sleek. You've got robust ones, some with short limbs, some with long limbs. Some of them have big hand claws, other ones don't. You've got some in salt water, some in fresh water, and some that are even mostly
What?
terrestrial. And
Oh.
it's really sad that there's just one, and it's just called Eurypterid. Now, as for the specific design of it, it's pretty clearly based on Megalograptus, which is a
Oh.
semi-well-known Eurypterid. It's a pretty nasty-looking guy, very big spines on it. Um, it is a very nice-looking animal, uh, but there's so many different kinds. They're so diverse, and it's just, oh, you could have done so much more with those.
Oh, that's such a missed opportunity. They literally could have like taken 10 or 15 different Eurypterids, I feel like, and sprinkled about because I mean the fact that they're in freshwater, saltwater, and on land, I mean there's a lot of possibility there for did
Yeah,
they have
they're
ones
they're
that could like
just
grow underground?
I don't know if there's any that would go, like, specifically underground. There are for sure ones that would, like, lay in the sediment and, like, muddy bottoms of lagoons and whatnot, but I don't think there's any that would specifically go underground.
Okay. I'm picturing trapdoor spider hunting was my fear. Goodness gracious. Missed opportunity there. That's disappointing. So what design wise, what's the idea there? Why do you think that they would just call it? Because can you give me a mammal equivalent so I fully understand? Just calling it Eurypterid, is that equivalent to just saying here is monkey?
So, the "id" ending is short for "ide," which is, like, the family level ending, right? Um,
Okay.
but Linnaean taxonomy is a little bit arbitrary, so that doesn't really, like, cross one to one to, like, you know, any mammal group. To me, like, it's maybe like it's honestly maybe like cramming all mammals into one thing. Like, because Eurypterids existed from the Ordovician to the end Permian. So that's like 300 million years or so. That's like the entirety of like synapsid evolution. Like that's everything from like Dimetrodon to us being crammed into one animal.
Oh God, that is that's appalling, I feel like. I love you to death, wild card, but what?
Yeah, no, like I don't know. They're such weird looking animals too, and they're so physically diverse. Um, I'm honestly really shocked that they didn't do like Jacalopterus or something, which, by the way, is the largest arthropod like that we know of. Period. Longer than Arthropleura, fully aquatic, of course, but this enormous Eurypterid, like between 2 and 3 meters long, just you know.
That is so scary. I have a violent fear of the ocean. So an ocean where
Mm.
there are ginormous things like that, absolutely not. No way.
Yeah, we are honestly quite fortunate that there are not giant Eurypterids in the ocean.
That is such a huge period of time too, because I was about to ask you, when do you think when in history, what period do you think would be the quote unquote toughest to survive the arthropod menaces in history? Or do you think it was just flat out basically if you were born if you were born in any of them, you were out of luck?
Honestly, I think the only ones that would present a real danger to humans are Eurypterids, and Eurypterids reached their peak in the Devonian, so that's your answer. I think the Devonian would be pretty nasty.
That's fair. That's fair. What a way to go, right?
Yeah.
Goodness. So, next question I have for you. The fossil record, it gives us, we've talked so much about all these crazy, ginormous arthropods and insects that just are not ginormous, really. So, what is up with that? What's the deal with all this airline food? Why are they like what environmental conditions are making these creatures that actually were large? Why are they large? And then the ones that weren't large, why is everyone making them large anyway?
Yeah, okay. So I'll start with the scientific basis for like why arthropods did get large during the Carboniferous. Um, the answer is we don't totally know, right? The answer that you'll get most of the time that people will repeat without, criticizing at all is that it's oxygen alone. But the oxygen level actually does not peak at the same time that arthropod size peaks. Arthropod size actually will peak in the early Carboniferous, or sorry, early Permian after the oxygen level has already started falling. So that's a little bit confusing what's going on there. There's plenty
Yeah.
of other suggestions. There's ecological suggestions, such as like just the sort of environment, like the plants, etc. That was what encouraged it. There's discussions of like, was it temperature? Was it warm then? Did that? Um, I think personally, the most likely answer is that without restrictions, arthropods can get pretty large. Then what happened is you have the end Permian mass extinction, and the Permian in general is this drying period. Most of these giant arthropods die out during this period because it's getting drier and it's getting hard to respirate, and they're not doing so hot. I think that if you know, if vertebrates had not started taking the ecological niches that these giant arthropods held, we probably would have seen giant arthropods again in the Triassic. But we don't. We see pterosaurs instead, right? The other thing that's of note is that it's actually only a very small handful of arthropod lineages that got giant. Um, there's only really three that I can name offhand, those being Arthropleura, just that one genus, um, the Meganeurids, so Meganeura and its close relatives, and a very obscure group of insects called the Paleodictyopterans. Now, there's a whole bunch of other arthropods around at this time. We've got the ancestors of cockroaches, we've got the ancestors of grasshoppers, crickets. We've got the earliest beetles, the earliest metamorphic insects, right? And none of these groups are becoming giant. So what that suggests is that it's not gigantism because of some sort of like inherent biological, oh, the conditions are right for all insects to get giant. It suggests that there's an ecological reason that some groups got giant, right? So it's a much more restricted phenomenon than most people think.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. That's logical.
Yeah. So then what happens historically, people have always found bugs scary, right? And so
Right.
it's a really, really old horror trope, like silent movie horror trope, for there to be giant insects. This is like, a really big thing. And so people have sort of taken this idea of like, okay, insects were giant in the past, which is true for some groups, plus this general trope of, oh, insects being big is a scary thing, and they sort of combine them together in ways that like don't really mesh up. So, for instance, right, mantises. Mantises were never giant. Mantises don't show up
Uh-huh.
until the Cretaceous. They're fairly modern. Um, as far as I'm aware, the largest mantises that we know of are ones that are alive today. We don't have fossils that are bigger than the biggest living mantises. But it's a really big trope. You see it all over the place of mantises being, in particular, giant. And I think that's because people think that mantises are scary, which, they kind of are, right?
Absolutely.
So,
They're
so
giant
basically,
enough
what you're
too.
seeing. what you're seeing is people combining a real scientific, thing that occurs in the fossil record, extrapolating that into, situations where it doesn't really apply.
Okay, that makes sense. Everybody wants to feel that big adrenaline rush, and what better way to do it than, I guess, strike home with something that's genuinely scary. So I see what they're doing there, but it just seems like an overused trope at this point, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think to a certain degree. I mean, I think it's fun to imagine giant bugs, and I think there are creative ways to do it. Um, with a setting like Ark in particular, though, like I feel like you can do a lot more interesting fantasy stuff by either working with actual giant arthropods that they haven't really looked at yet, or, just outright creating, your own interesting things that aren't just like modern insects.
That's totally fair. That's valid. I'll give you that. Um, so forgive me if you already touched on this a little bit, but we talked about how these few giant arthropods did pop into existence. They were far and few between, but why are they no longer here again? And why would they be successful nowadays if we were able to like pick up a successful breeding pair and transplant them to 2025? Would they still be able to successfully navigate this ecosystem, or do you think it's too different now that it wouldn't work out?
Right. Yeah. So you see a decline in like giant insects towards the middle to late Permian. The Permian, for context, is when Pangea existed in its peak form. And so you've got this massive inland desert because all the continents have combined into one giant continent. And also, the climate in general is getting hotter. So the world is becoming very arid very quickly. And these giant insects evolved for the coal swamps of the Carboniferous and early Permian. So, like
Yeah.
Arthroplura had evolved to consume all of this excess plant matter from these really productive forest ecosystems. And Meganeura, being a relative of dragonflies, would have had aquatic larvae, which would have probably been sensitive to ecological change. And they would have been feeding on other insects, which likewise would have been reliant on these rainforest ecosystems. And so these groups, which were again reliant on these coal swamps, as the coal swamps are lost, you lose the diversity of those giant arthropods.
And are those
So,
coal swamps not, sorry to interrupt you, are those coal
no, no,
swamps
keep going.
not comparable to like the Brazilian rainforest or any rainforest that we see on Earth today? Is that not a comparable level of humidity or
I think it is reasonably comparable in some ways. Ecologically, there's going to be obviously some things that are very different. Um,
yeah.
I think the biggest issue that you would have in, bringing these back to modern day and letting them go and hoping they do well, is ecological competition. The reason that, you know, Meganura and its relatives were so successful is because they were the first major aerial predators ever, right? They did not have any competition from vertebrates in the sky. Today, we've got, I think, just two major lineages of flying organisms besides insects, those being bats and birds. But bats and birds are going to be taking up a lot of the same ecological space that these arthropods would be inhabiting. You're also potentially looking at higher predation on the larvae than they would have experienced in their actual, environment. So I don't think they do very well at all, to be honest.
Yeah, those are good points. Those are good points. I guess my follow-up question, with the air drying out and that causing so much problem in them not being able to survive through the new arid environment, if they had been able to develop like a mucus membrane, do you think that would have been able to help them through that arid environment to at least buy them some time for evolution? Or do you think that it still would have been the kiss of death just because it was, is that how it works? I know there's so many extinction events throughout history. Is it eventually time? Is that just how it works?
I mean, the fact of the matter is that everything alive today has survived every extinction event so far. So obviously things survive. So, right circumstances, maybe they could have. Um, insects in general have a really hard time dealing with moisture. Um, they don't have active respiration, so they don't breathe with lungs like us, right? We pump air in and out. They can't do that. And what that means is that what they do instead is they increase the surface area inside of their trachea to, take in as much air as possible. The problem is if you increase the surface area with the trachea, you're increasing water loss. So the bigger you are, the more oxygen you need, the easier it is to lose water. And so just evolving a mucous membrane would do very little to actually stop that. The mucus would just end up drying out. Um, the answer really to how could these giant insects survive is that they would have to get smaller. And that's pretty much what happened, you know? These giant
Yeah, that's
lineages
fair.
themselves died out, but their smaller relatives survived broadly unchanged.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, so I get is it did the dinosaurs sort of suffer the same thing? Was their size what did them in? I understand, the asteroid and all the other extinction events, the lack of oxygen, and there's been like multiple different things that took out different species of dinosaurs throughout history, but do you think that their excessive size had something to do with their lack of ability to adapt?
I mean, for sure, 100% getting to the actual extinction event, you know, if you need a ton of food, it's very difficult to survive multiple years without the sun, where you need large plant matter and then large herbivores. Um, Without the, meteor hitting, I think they would have been fine. I don't think size was really a factor at all in their survival. I mean, we don't really see any decline in, dinosaur diversity leading up to the end of Cretaceous. You just sort of have the meteor that finishes them off.
Which is fair. I mean, on one hand, thank goodness, but on the other hand, aw shucks. Do you think that humans could have coexisted and co-evolved next to dinosaurs, or do you think that the lack of that meteor would have prevented humans from evolving to where we are today?
Yeah, so the butterfly effect, I think, plays a huge role in evolution, where you make any small change and you're inevitably going to have a completely different path of evolution, right? The only reason that modern mammal groups were able to diversify after the KPG is because those ecological niches were open after the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. So you would have never gotten humans, right? Now, on the other hand, let's just imagine, right? Somehow humans do exist in the Cretaceous. Do I think that humans could survive in a world filled with dinosaurs? Probably. I mean, we're pretty, ingenuous, like we're very good at the things that we do.
Ah, yeah, that's fair. I'll give you that. I guess follow-up question. They're just gonna get weirder and weirder. I don't know nearly as much as you do about any of this, so I'm so sorry that these are probably silly questions. But
Oh, you're fine.
do do you think that what I guess if humans hadn't evolved, what type of species would have risen up to fill those types of niches? Do you think it would have been more flying species? Do you think we'd have sentient lizards or octopods walking around? Like, where do you
I
think the
personally
world
don't
would
think
be
that
today?
it's I don't think that it's inevitable for a sapient species to evolve. As far as we know, none evolved before us, and for all we know, there might be none after us. If there were to be a sapient species that evolved in our place, I think it'd probably be most likely a near avian dinosaur like a troodontid or dromaeosaur or something like that. Something with a relatively smart brain and relatively capable hands.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I feel like the hands would definitely play a huge factor in it. T-Rex would probably never have been able to evolve to a much higher level just simply due to the inability to use its hands for anything super useful, I feel like.
Yeah, just also wouldn't have the ecological pressure for it to do that.
That's fair, that's fair. I had seen a journal at one point that tried to say that T-Rexes had like a really highly established culture and like it was basically trying to paint them out as this like almost sentient species, and it was
Yeah,
very
there was
confusing to me.
discussion in literature over the last few years looking into like how smart they would have been, with some suggesting baboons intelligence or higher. Um, I think the consensus now is that, somewhere in the realm of bird, which is to say not dumb, but,
Not at all.
not not human smart or even, primate smart.
Yeah, but smart enough to cause a lot of trouble. Jurassic Park would not be that easy getaway.
No, yeah. Smarter than you'd expect, I think.
Oh. I know you talked a handful about a few of these arthropods that you really like, and I know you're really passionate about cockroaches and some other ones. But is there a particular extinct arthropod that you wish people knew more about? Something that, is more interesting than has been thrown out there? I know the Eurypterids seem a heck of a lot more interesting than I knew they were, but what about you? Is there anything that you wish everyone knew compared to pop culture?
Mm, that is a good question. Um, To be honest, a lot of the insects that interest me are very small, boring, like Jurassic Cretaceous insects that like if I showed them to most people, they'd be like, yeah, that just looks like a bug. Um, my favorite like stem group arthropod for sure is Anomalocaris. I fucking love Anomalocaris. It's a great animal. Um,
What even
but
is
yeah,
that?
it's okay. You don't okay. You Google anomalous cars right now, and I'm telling everybody who's listening, you should do that too. Anomalocaris is the sort of intermediary group between the sort of soft-bodied ancestors of arthropods and like the early arthropods. So it's a pelagic
Hey,
organism. It's living out in the open ocean, and it's got really big frontal limbs that are hardened for catching prey, and I think it's really fun.
I almost feel like that was a big um inspiration for the Eurypterid, the Nomalocaris here. It's got a lot of similar. There's something that I've seen that looks very, very similar to it. I can't put my finger on what it is though. That's a goofy creature.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it.
That's goofy. What is? Tell me about these little that appendage on the front. Are those teeth? Are those spikes? Like, what is that? Is that like a tentacle it grab things with?
So here's the interesting thing, right? Do you want me to just like start from the beginning, like going through all arthropods? Because I can explain how we got here, but this is gonna get a little bit like into the weeds very quickly.
Maybe give me the summary.
Yeah, okay. So essentially, the ancestral form for arthropods is a segmented worm that then has an outgrowth on each segment, and those outgrowths are what become the limbs, right? So imagine just a long worm with one limb on each segment, right? In a normal
Okay.
Caris, what happens is the front limbs on the first segment get hardened. They get what's called sclerotized, which means that there's a molecule called sclerotin, which has been embedded into the chitin to make them hard. So they're using those front limbs basically to catch prey and then shove it in their mouth. Now, later arthropods basically take that sclerotin and apply it to the whole rest of the body. So, looking at a modern arthropod, they basically adapted those sclerotized, front limbs that Arthropleura has, and use that to make the rest of their body.
Well, that is interesting. Oh my goodness. I can't stop staring at this thing. This looks like a Pokemon.
There is a Pokemon based on it.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. What Pokemon is based on it?
Anorith.
Anorith. Let me look that up.
I believe it's a Gen 2 fossil Pokemon.
Okay, so that is what I was picturing. As soon as I saw it, yep, I was like, I've seen this before. Not an Arc, but yep, that's it. I know that now. Okay. What a goofy creature. Oh my goodness. So was this thing like an aggressive, is it going to kill you if you're in the water with it, or was it going after crustaceans, or what was its diet? What was it like?
So we're not 100% sure. There's actually some debate about it. Um, Most likely, it was preying on other arthropods like trilobites, basically grabbing them and shoving them into its mouth. Um, there is some question as to whether the mouth parts themselves were actually strong enough to hunt trilobites, and in that case, it would have been hunting, soft-bodied invertebrates. But there is still some suggestion that it may have been trilobites that it was eating. Um, Anomalocaris itself is actually fairly small, um, less than a meter. Some of the big ones got more than a meter, some of the bigger anomalocarids, which makes them some of the largest predators of the Cambrian.
Oh wow, okay. The Cambrian was pretty tiny little era then, huh?
Yeah, most things during the Cambrian were very, very small. An animal, getting more than a meter, that's pretty scary big for the Cambrian.
Okay, so if now I know if anybody ever asks me what for $1 million, what era would you be able to survive a day in? Looks like Cambrian.
Yeah, you'd have a little bit of a rough time. I mean, it'd be like playing Subnautica. Like there's not really anything going on land. It's kind of all in the water.
Well, I would assure you I could stay far away from the water. Well, all right. This one, all right, here we go. Here's an interesting question for you. If you could bring back one extinct arthropod for a day, safely contained, of course, what would you choose and why? Is there, walk me through that. Would you take something that you just want to study for a day? What's your plan? What you got going on?
This is like maybe the most like nerd answer ever, but like there's a group of arthropods that we sometimes call Archaeorthopterans or Protorthopterans. Um, and they're a group that is like sort of ancestral to a bunch of living groups of insects, including, grasshoppers, cockroaches, all of the so-called orthopteroid orders of insects. The problem about the Archaeorthopterans is that we don't actually know which modern groups any of them are actually closest related to, because they're so primitive that it's just like, well, we can tell they're related to some of these, but we don't really know which. I'd like to get one of those and do like genetic sequencing on it and say, okay, this one's closest related to such and such living group of insects. If I could only bring back one, right, it's not going to solve a whole lot, but it would answer one mystery, and that's enough for me.
Yeah, that's right there is what you're looking to do in life, I feel like. If you're able to take a passion and solve one of the mysteries that nobody else has been able to, that's a job well done right there, right?
Mhm.
Goodness. All right. Well, the I've picked your brain about a lot of random stuff, but the last question I've got here for you is what is your favorite arthropod in pop culture, accurate or not, and why? So is there a famous one, that always gets you excited?
So we talked about it just a little bit earlier, but I love like the depictions of arthropods in Pokemon because they're both stylistically interesting and in many cases weirdly accurate. Um, a lot of the beetles in Pokemon I find very appealing design-wise. Like Heracross is just a really, really nicely designed animal. Um, and I I actually have a plush of Amaranth, the Anomalocaris Pokemon. So I'm a big fan of those designs. I think they're very fun.
That's fantastic. Okay, okay. All right. Well, Nate, I appreciate your time. I learned a lot today. I learned first off that I know very little about arthropods and insects, and I've walked away with a lot of questions, but also a lot more answers. So I guess I've got some research to do now.
Well, I'm glad to provide information.
The I guess the last question, because it's gonna bug me if I don't ask it. What is your favorite story about all of your insect keeping that you've ever done in your whole life? What is the most memorable story that if somebody says, "Tell me something crazy that's happened," you say, "Hold my beer."
Oh, geez. Um, that's a really hard question to answer on the spot.
It is. It
I've had
is.
a
I'm
lot
so
of I've
sorry.
had a lot of interactions with insects that most people would not consider. Um, oh, I mean, hmm. I don't know. I'll just, say a few off the top of my head. They won't take very long. It'll just be a few things.
No
Um,
worries.
uh, when I went to Costa Rica a few years back, I saw trapjaw ants for the first time. Now, trapjaw ants are super, super cool because they've got these really big mandibles that snap shut. That's why they're called trapjaws, right? So, looking at those, you're immediately like, okay, I'm going to avoid touching the jaws, but I want to pick it up to take a picture of it, because it's a really cool tropical insect that I've never seen before. Um, that was when I learned that trapjaw ants can sting, not with their jaws, but with a stinger on the abdomen. And it
Oh no.
hurts. It hurts quite a bit. I'm told that it feels like a bee sting. I've never actually been stung by a bee. I've been stung by plenty of other things now, but it's not fun. It's really not fun.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I can imagine that it's not. That's that's
Yeah,
spooky.
and
I'm looking at a
then
picture of one of those right now. I would not pick that up.
it's not huge, but they're really cool. And then this summer, I went on a trip with a lab mate of mine. So what I needed to do was I needed to go west to collect a bunch of species of the genus Parkoblotta for research that I'm doing right now. Parkoblotta being a native woodroach genus. Um, so I flew to Chicago and then we drove to San Diego, California. Uh, and along the way, we interacted with like a lot of the wildest bugs in the U.S. Um, a lot of it was not me interacting with them directly. A lot of them was watching my lab mate. Um, and those interactions included grabbing tarantulas out of their burrow with his bare hand. The tarantula was really chill. The tarantula was not the issue. The issue was the fire ants that made their nest above the tarantula burrow, which then proceeded to really bite the heck out of him. That was a
Oh.
time. That was fun. Um, we found wild Scolopendra centipedes, which, if you don't know, are the centipedes that get like a foot long or longer,
Oh
which
God.
we had to catch for his research because he's doing genetic research on Scolopendra right now. Um, so
Okay.
it was
That's
just
terrifying.
flipping logs and trying to catch foot-long centipedes that are hiding under these logs. And they're fast too. They're incredibly fast. Got a crazy venomous bite. But neither of us got
Oh
bitten, and
God.
we got those things. We got those things. So that was a
How
time.
did you catch them?
Uh,
Was it with your bare hands?
so the trick was you have to like step on them gently, like gently enough to hold them in place, but like not let them run, which is difficult. He did that because I didn't want to, squish him, right? And he was experienced doing that. And then basically do that, grab them right behind their head so that they can't whip their head around and bite you, and then put them into a container like that. And it's stressful. It's very, very stressful. But again,
How
we
do
were
you know where
successful.
to
We managed
pinch?
it.
How do you know where they like
Experience, I
how far
I
to
was
turn
not
their
the one
neck? Oh
grabbing
God.
them. But yeah, it was a time. It was great. So yeah.
What does the venom do to you when it bites you?
Oh, it hurts. It hurts real bad. Like for hours it stings. Like you can look up people getting bitten by those things. It's rough. I mean, it's enough to like paralyze a small mammal. Unfortunately, we're not small mammals, so it just hurts like hell, but you know.
Dang. So I guess on that note, I'm sure you've heard of I think it's called Brave Wilderness and Coyote
Mhm.
Peterson and the guys on YouTube that for those of you that aren't familiar, there's a guy on YouTube who will literally be like, "Hi, I'm Coyote Peterson and I'm about to get stung by the world's crappiest insect and we're gonna give you a number." And he does like my understanding is he does this like science study on it and he's creating a pain index scale and has cataloged a lot of different species, if I'm not mistaken, as far as how painful their bites and stings are. Is that when you look at that, are you like, wow, you're a visionary, good for you, or is he just a total dumbass to you?
Somewhere in between. I think it's a little bit sensationalist, and it's not my favorite kind of like, educational content, but it is entertaining.
It is rather entertaining. Yeah, it's interesting. Is that something you would ever, for the name of science in your studies, would you subject yourself to a bite or sting intentionally just for the science of it?
No, no. I'm a little bit of a coward in that sense. I would much rather avoid getting bitten or stung if I can avoid it. I mean, I didn't get stung by a wasp until last year, and I'm a kind of person who's been picking up bugs since they were a kid, right? So I've been, pretty careful.
I bet getting stung for the first time as an adult was probably rather shocking. Felt like you were getting attacked, eh?
Oh, it was so deserved. We I was taking a larval entomology class, and we really wanted to get wasp larvae for this class. So me and my friend, the same guy who I drove cross country with, he's like, "Hey Nate, there's a bald-faced hornet nest like on the sidewalk here, like just overhanging it. Like this is not a safe place for these wasps to be, so it's going to get removed anyway. Why don't we remove it and keep, the larvae for our class?" So I'm like, "Sure, sure. This seems like a great idea." Um, our idea was we had a big Tupperware full of, I can't remember what it is. It's a chemical that we use to kill insects humanely, but we had way too much of it. Um, so we had this big Tupperware full of it, and our plan was to cut the branch with a pair of shears, drop the nest into this Tupperware, and shut it quickly. Well, the problem was the nest was connected to multiple branches, so we couldn't just cut one. We also thought it was going to be cold enough that the wasps weren't going to be active. It was not. They were active. Um, so we started cutting that branch, right? And the wasps are mad. They're so mad. And they start flying out. I only got stung once, but bald-faced hornets are nothing to laugh at in terms of a sting. I mean, they're far from the worst, but I had a spot that stuck on my arm for like 2 weeks after that. Like you could see where I got stung. And I wouldn't recommend messing with wasps if you can avoid it.
Yeah, wasps are one of those creatures that you can't change my mind. Wasps are evil. They're just jerks and they do things just to be jerks, I'm convinced.
I think they're ecologically important, and I think they're really interesting, but they can be quite nasty if you mess with them.
Yeah, yeah, they're just so darn territorial. And if you've ever seen a
They are
drunk wasp,
territorial, yeah.
gee whiz, I tell you what, stay away from apple orchards when it's all fallen and fermented.
Mm.
Um, all right, all right. I'm gonna ramble all night, so I'm gonna stop myself here. Nate, I greatly appreciate your time. I really appreciate you sharing all your knowledge with us, and not only your time, but some of these fun stories here at the end. I had a lot of fun talking to you, man.
Yeah, it was great talking. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I will give you a heads up when this episode is gonna be posted. Those of you that are listening now, this episode was recorded middle of August, right before classes start for the both of us. Nate's getting ready to go back to class here soon. Classes start for me the following week, so pre-recording a bunch of stuff, and I'm not sure exactly when this one's gonna get out, but when it does, Nate, I will give you a heads up. So if you wanted to tune in, then you'll be able to.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Thank you again, Nate. I appreciate you. And survivors, keep on surviving. We will see you next week, folks.